The Call of Duty franchise is probably the most polarizing game franchise in existence. Polarizing in the sense that while no one has anything good to say about any of the games, it's still the third best-selling video game franchise of all time, behind Mario and fucking Tetris. Mario and Tetris, and then Call of Duty. Can't believe it. Understand. The franchise has been around for almost 20 years and has undergone many revamps and remasters, to the point where comparing some of the games side by side can be quite challenging. You may even argue that some games in the series are entirely different genres from one another. When I review these games, I'm first going to talk about what I think the developers were trying to accomplish when designing them. Most of these games can be separated into single player and multiplayer, and I think it would be silly to review them as the same thing. These days, Call of Duty is fairly synonymous with its multiplayer. Shut up and leave me alone! But I still think that if you're going to release a single-player campaign with your game, that it should be held to the standard of any other single-player game. The multiplayer will be harder to analyze, but we will talk about things like progression and overall gunplay, but we'll get to that later. Let's start at the beginning. Call of Duty 1, or just Call of Duty, came out for PC only in 2003. Some other notable titles coming out in 2003 were Max Payne 2, Warcraft 3, Silent Hill 3, The Elder Scrolls 3, and many others, though these are the big names on that list. Call of Duty's release wasn't exactly the first of its kind. World War II games had been done before by series like Wolfenstein, which had games in 1992, and Medal of Honor, which saw its first release in 1999. So it's quite strange that Call of Duty suddenly came along and captured such lightning in a bottle. What about this first release was so interesting? Well, let's back up to cover what I had said before. What was the point of Call of Duty? Well, if you can believe it, Call of Duty actually had no multiplayer. The point of the game was clearly to function as a World War II sim. I think it could be said that the real point of the game was to provide the player with a realistic first-hand experience of the battles that occurred during the war, and therefore it should be judged on the following factors: authenticity, or how well it portrays the real-life events that it features; story, or how they're able to tell a story through an event that already took place; and overall gameplay. Though I think for this title anyways, that is surprisingly going to be taking a back seat. It's worth noting that this is one of the few Call of Duty games that I haven't played, so much of the information about its campaign that I'll be communicating to you was discovered by watching other people play, and by just reading the Wikipedia page. Normally this is pretty lazy, but there's not much content to get through for this one. Anyways, let's get into the actual game, shall we? Call of Duty is separated into 3 separate campaigns, focusing on 3 separate sides of the Allied victory in World War II. There is an American campaign, a British campaign, and finally a Soviet campaign. Beginning with the Americans, you start by doing some training at boot camp to teach you the controls, and are then briefed on Operation Overlord, or the attack on the beaches of Normandy, otherwise known as D-Day. For some reason, as a brand new private in the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, you are tasked with a solo mission as your first job. Establish a landing zone for your fellow paratroopers. This whole mission feels very Band of Brothers-esque, which came out 2 years prior. I doubt that's a coincidence, by the way. There's even the same shot of a paratrooper hanging from a tree, which is honestly a nice touch. Details like this are really important for selling the experience of war. War is messy. Sometimes you die getting stuck in a tree before ever setting foot on the battlefield. Very quickly do things go poorly, as eventually the Germans will discover your existence, and you and the soldiers around you come under heavy fire. Let's stop here to address that last one. You and other soldiers. Apparently Call of Duty was one of the first games to feature friendly AI squad mates. Games that we talked about before, like Wolfenstein and Medal of Honor, featured very lone wolf-style protagonists. The player on their own versus the entire Axis power, basically. The addition of these AI squad mates really helped to sell the World War II experience. I can't help but wonder if the first mission starts out solo in an attempt to subvert your expectations, so you're surprised when other actual soldiers arrive and start fighting with you. If so, that's pretty great. And I suppose I can excuse the fact that this is your first day on the job. The mission finishes when you and the rest of the soldiers secure the German town. The second mission of the campaign is focused on driving out the remainder of the German resistance surrounding the town you just took. The big event of this mission is when you have to destroy multiple anti-aircraft tanks. There's basically nothing else to say about this mission. It's very standard World War II tropey nonsense. Not that it's bad, but it's definitely not interesting. The third mission, or at least I think it's the third mission. The video I watched came third, but the description on Wikipedia labels the mission as the 4th mission. So let's just say, for simplicity's sake, that this is the 4th mission. So the 4th mission is a driving mission, and man do I hate those. You yourself aren't driving. In fact, you're riding shotgun, as Sergeant Moody drives you and Private Elder along a highway to deliver an important message. That message being that they need help, basically. The reason that I hate missions like this so much is because there are basically no stakes. Since you're being driven along a predetermined path and there's no way for you to take cover since you're, like, attached to the car, the enemies are basically programmed not to kill you, or to not try, at least. In the video that I watched of someone playing this part, they literally didn't take a single point of damage. In fact, I don't even think someone fired at them. So at that point, what's even left of the mission if I can beat it by going and getting a snack? I understand that it's 2003 and that I'm being a little harsh, but it's a critique, so no. People will try and defend things like this by saying that it's cool, like you're driving in a car and shooting or whatever, but I'm just not buying it. The only difference between this and the last mission is that you're invincible and there's unbearable camera shake. That's not cool. That's just harder to aim and less satisfying. Now, in this mission's defense, the car shit is split up into two parts. You're driving along a highway, you get to a town, you fight in the town, and then you get back on the highway. Well, the end is basically right down the street, so it's not that much of a pass. After delivering the message, Sergeant Moody goes in to get your order for the next mission. So the last mission ended with Sergeant Moody going to get your orders. And this mission starts with us in a field with no idea what those orders are. Basically, this mission is another throwaway. It's like the same as the second mission, where you had to destroy the tanks because they were destroying your aircraft. Well, now you gotta destroy some artillery because they're destroying your guys. It's fucking D-Day also. Still, the game doesn't do a great job at communicating that, since every mission there's a loading screen, and it seems like it's a new time of day. Also, a lot has happened, but I think that's a good thing. Having the entire American campaign, for the most part, take place during that single day can really sell to the player just how long that day was for the actual soldiers. So much has happened that even I figured it had been multiple days, but no. In fact, the actual initial attack on the beaches started at 6 a.m. and finished 6 fucking days later. So it makes sense for you to still be fighting. Had points for realism, I guess. So I guess you did such a good job in the other parts of this campaign that your unit gets reassigned for a top-secret mission to rescue 2 British officers, Captain Price and Major Ingram. You find Price, and he tells you that Ingram has been moved to a different prison. So the next mission, in actuality, this mission is pretty cool. For the first time in the campaign, you're not in the middle of an active war zone, so that's good. Instead, you're sneaking around a German mansion with a secret prison. That's pretty cool. The music is tense, and there are Nazi flags everywhere, which adds to the feeling of being behind enemy lines. There's even a secret entrance hidden behind a fireplace. So this is not exactly recycled bullshit like I was expecting. They're clearly trying here. So yada yada, you find Price. I said it before. Let's go. Next mission. This mission's actually pretty cool too. It starts in a similar way. You're doing the exact same thing, but it starts in a similar way as the last mission. You need to break into this prison so you can free this guy. Except as soon as you kill someone, which is like the first thing it tells you to do, a timer starts counting down. You have 10 minutes to find Major Ingram before German reinforcements arrive. You have to navigate your way around this Nazi base while sirens blare and German commands are being barked over the loudspeaker. It's very tense, and it's a creative way for these devs to change up the formula. When you have so few missions in a campaign, it's important to make them stand out from one another. I can totally see myself having played this in 2003 and then referencing it later in life as the Time mission or something. Kind of like how I refer to Call of Duty 4's mission, all ghillied up, as the ghillie suit mission. Because it's fucking awesome, and I will never forget it, ever. So you find Ingram, and the mission ends. That's it. For the final mission of the American campaign, the legendary Battle of the Bulge is on the docket. For those of you who don't know, this battle was really significant in the war because it was defending an important area called Bastogne that the Allies didn't think they would have so soon. Because of how fast they secured the location, it was hard for supplies to reach them since no one expected them to have control over it, so supplies weren't being sent there just yet. I bring this up because I think that when portraying this battle, these details are what make it so infamous. My favorite episode of Band of Brothers, Bastogne, features little to no fighting, but rather follows combat medic Eugene Rowe as he scavenges for supplies to treat the many wounded soldiers. When the battle actually does begin, we see those consequences immediately. One of my favorite scenes, a soldier is injured in combat, and when Eugene is about to stab him with the syringe of morphine, he refuses, telling Eugene to save it for the other soldiers who need it more than him, and that he can fight through the pain. It's a really impactful moment for me. Basically, my point with this is that the bar is set extremely high. If you're going to have a Battle of the Bulge mission, you need to have some sort of mechanic that makes it feel like the Battle of the Bulge. Unfortunately, the final mission captures none of this. Almost as if to rub it in, you have a metric fuck ton of ammo. All you do is fight your way to a bunker and secure some documents. It's very disappointing. You take something so interesting like the Battle of the Bulge and you suck all the details out of it. It's just boring. It's just another mission. Sure, there's snow on the ground, but this is no different from the second mission, basically. So, unfortunately, that's the end of the American campaign. I guess since the game is separated into 3 campaigns itself, I can review each one independently. Again, I never played these ones, so talking about the gameplay is going to be pretty hard. But to be honest, Call of Duty gameplay hasn't changed too much over the past decade or so. Overall, we need to remember that this game's primary intention is to be a World War II sim, and to offer a unique way to experience something that up until this point we've only ever seen in books and film. To that regard, I think the American campaign does a pretty kick-ass job, especially with the tools that it had in 2003. It lacked a lot of detail, but I think it pretty effectively portrayed what a soldier's experience could have been like as an American in World War II. I wouldn't go as far as to say that this game was so faithful to the real-life events, to the point where if you were to reskin all the weapon and character models with Vietnam-era weaponry, you could pretty easily fool someone that this game was about the Vietnam War instead. If you're thinking to yourself, well, duh, my point is more so what I was talking about with the Battle of the Bulge. In the same way that the previous mission could have been referred to as the time mission, I feel like there was room here to make the Battle of the Bulge the supply mission or something, forcing the player and his unit to start with little ammo and need to secure multiple supply drops to fuel up, forcing the player to think about the ammo they use, or just copy Band of Brothers entirely, and make the player play as a medic for a mission, running around securing supplies and or reviving allies. I don't think either of those things are too out of the realm for these devs to have done, but this is just the first campaign, so maybe there's more to come. Alright, let's move on to the British campaign. So before we get too far into exactly what happens in this campaign, I just want to shortly summarize each mission from the American campaign and compare to a summary of the British one. You'll see why in a second. For the American campaign, it goes something like this. You start off by going to boot camp and training. This is effectively the tutorial and doesn't really count. Your first mission is to secure a German town. Your second mission is to defend that German town. And then you have that shitty driving mission. You drive to get some new orders. Those new orders tell you that you need to destroy German artillery. After this mission, you get reassigned and are immediately placed into a more secretive role. Mission 6 is a bit of a stealth mission as you're tasked with rescuing 2 British officers. They managed to stretch this one out into 2 missions. And then the campaign finishes with a shitty Battle of the Bulge. In comparison, the British campaign goes a little bit like this. Your first mission is to secure a German bridge. Your second mission is to defend that German bridge. Then you get reassigned. You have to destroy some artillery. Then you go on a driving mission. Then after escaping, you have a stealth mission where you have to pretend to be German. And then the campaign finishes with a shitty final battle again. I mean, they're the same, are they not? Just look at the notes that I took for this video. Comparing them side by side, it's virtually the same campaign. Sure, some of the story beats are a bit different, like when you get reassigned is, 3 missions earlier. But other than that, the story beats are the exact same. Towards the end of the British campaign, things get a little bit more interesting. The stealth mission where you have to be German is pretty cool. But overall, I mean, this is lazy as hell, right? I said something earlier about how you can just reskin the American campaign with Vietnam weapons and call it a Vietnam game, and there would be no difference. That point rings really true here, as the only difference between the US campaign and the British campaign is that you use British weapons. I'm going to try to speed through this campaign a bit more because there's really not much else to talk about. The only thing that I think is really interesting about this is that some of the set pieces are a bit better. Like with the driving mission, rather than just stopping, getting new orders, and continuing on with a new mission, you escape on an airplane, which is kind of cool, I guess. But yeah, not a lot to talk about here, so we'll try to keep it brief. So I'm going to be jumping straight into mission 6, because thankfully, this is in fact the first mission in this game of its kind. You dress up as German soldiers in an attempt to infiltrate a German battleship, disabling its defenses and securing some vital intelligence that will help the British troops destroy the ship later on. This is probably the best mission in the game so far. In and of itself, this mission has some interesting story beats. After arriving on the ship, you check in with a German guard to try and get some security clearance, but you don't have the proper papers. The German guard calls for a superior on the phone. Captain Price decides to go guns loud with absolutely no reason to do so. Price caps the 2 guards, immediately alerting the entire ship to your presence. Why did he do that? All the guard had said was, I have 2 officers with me who say that they have the proper papers. Even if this phone call was intended to alert the rest of the Germans to your presence, why not let it continue on the off chance that they just let you through if you're planning on blowing your cover anyway? It's kind of a huge shame. The mission was set up to be so interesting, and only a few minutes in have we managed to find a way to return to the same old formula of plant the explosives and defend until they go off. I know I said that this is the best mission in the game so far, and I still think so. Despite returning to a familiar style, there are still some details here that set it apart from all the other generic missions you've done so far. You're blending in as German officers, so you don't have any British weapons on you. You're forced to use the weapons that you find on fallen German soldiers. At first you're pretty strapped for ammo, but things eventually resolve themselves. I think this is kind of a cool detail. It makes things a little more interesting, at the least, I guess. I don't know. Eventually you fight your way off the ship like you would in any other mission. Oh, also Captain Price dies. I first found this out while I was watching a playthrough and got to the end of the mission, only for Sergeant Waters, who wasn't even there fighting, to tell us that we lost him. This really surprised me, as you'd imagine that the player would be the first one to find out. But rewinding back through the footage, I couldn't even find where he died. I had to specifically look up his death scene, if you can even call it that. He just sort of randomly dies while the two of you are fighting on the ship. If it wasn't for this video, I never would have noticed that he dies here. The video goes out of its way to look for his dead body. I mean, just look at this. Is this how a meaningful character is supposed to be killed off? I mean, it's the first real character that dies in combat, and it basically happens off screen. Sad. The final mission, which I've already alluded to as being shitty, is very shitty. It's virtually identical to the last mission in the American campaign. Maybe there's something they thought was cool about snowy levels being the finale. At least this mission has the decency to throw in one final plant the explosives and defend them until they go off part. The American campaign did even have one of those in the final level. Again, I think if I showed you footage from the American final level and this final level, you wouldn't even be able to notice the difference. In fact, that's what I've been doing this whole time. This is footage from the American final level, and this is footage from the British final level. They're the exact same. I'm not saying that either of the levels are bad. I already said that. The British version is much better than the US version, but again, they're the same. I don't want to play the British version because I've already played the US one. This is really lazy. I'm not saying you can't have multiple snow levels, but we're doing the same shit we've been doing the whole game. This final level is unfortunately a disappointment for the same reasons. So I think that's where we'll call it for our recap of the British campaign. I know I've said this 100 times, but it's the exact same as the US campaign. And that doesn't mean it's bad. It's actually better than the US campaign, but they can't both be good and be in the same game, unfortunately. The British campaign did everything the American campaign did, but with more drama. This campaign sees you piloting multiple artillery weapons, destroying enemy vehicles, and even going undercover as a German officer. I don't have much else to say about this campaign, unfortunately. It's just a rehash of the old one, but slightly more interesting. I'm praying that the Soviet campaign has more to offer. I'm getting goosebumps already. The Soviet campaign is easily the most cinematic of the three campaigns, and that's after about 5 minutes of being into the first mission. This mission is to take place in the Battle of Stalingrad. This battle is another extremely significant event on the timeline of World War II. It is considered to be one of the most brutal battles occurring between Russian forces and Nazi forces in the Russian city of Stalingrad. This battle was a decisive moment for the Allied forces, as Russia was able to protect one of its most important cities, which bore the name of their leader, Joseph Stalin. The mission starts with the player assuming the role of Alexei Voronin as they board some sort of amphibious vehicle and set across the Volga River. This, of course, occurs after a short pep talk from one of the poorly voice-acted Russian officers who tell the soldiers how important of a day it is and how proud they should be to be a part of something so significant. Then, almost with perfect comedic timing, the German Luftwaffe wipe out half your ship's crew. After experiencing this, many of the remaining soldiers panic and don't want to fight anymore, and they jump ship in an attempt to flee from battle. The Russian officers immediately open fire on them, shouting, "Stop those traitors! No mercy for deserters." I think this is great because we're only so few minutes into the scripted intro, and already the Soviet soldiers are bringing an entirely different vibe to the table. This is clearly not the British or American campaign, as neither the British nor American officers would gun down their own soldiers. Things continue to go poorly. As soon as Alexei and co. arrive at the dock, their ship explodes, with Alexei barely surviving. You regroup with the rest of the surviving soldiers as some of the Russian officers start to distribute weapons and ammo. You're given a semi-automatic rifle and 5 rounds of ammunition. Before getting too far, another shell goes off right near the player's feet, and immediately everything gets very disoriented. I love the detail they added of someone dragging a body across the screen. It's like the hanging paratrooper from the first campaign, but with so much more context and life to it. The mission has just begun, and while all the words spoken to Alexei so far have been about how capable he and his fellow soldiers are, everything that has actually happened has communicated the opposite. So far, Alexei has learned that even if the Germans don't get you, and they will get you, then your own officers may even put you down. No matter what direction he heads in, death seems to await our friend Alexei. Next, the player is prompted to find a more experienced soldier and obtain new orders. You meet up with Sergeant Borodin, who tells you to run across an open field, being showered with machine gun fire 2 times. Thankfully, you're able to make it across. You eventually find a soldier trying to communicate with Russian artillery, and Sergeant Borodin tells you that he's almost out of ammo, and you might even look down and notice that you're in the same boat. The artillery strike arrives, and you hear all the Russian soldiers cheering as they push the Germans back. You have to keep in mind how important of a battle this is to these guys. This is the most important part of the most important city under German control, and you were sent here to take it back. This is what makes this level so great, and I can thankfully take the title of Best Mission away from the German impersonation mission and give it to the Battle of Stalingrad. This is exactly what I was hoping for from the Battle of the Bulge mission from the American campaign. Everything is built so perfectly. Just in the intro, you're shown how important this is to the Russian soldiers. Then once you arrive, tension builds as you're bombed repeatedly and given no ammo to defend yourself. You meet up with Sergeant Borodin, and the two of you barely make it in time in order to call the artillery strike that saves the city. You're a part of each important story beat, and at the end, you're getting to charge in and retake Red Square. It's the perfect ending to a perfect mission. Mission 2 opens in a similar vein as Mission 1, as groups of Soviet soldiers are attempting to retreat from battle. But you can't do that, so a machine gunner does what machine gunners do. Eventually, you meet up with one Sergeant Makarov, and he tells you that you're going to be taking a flanking maneuver. So he brings you to a abandoned house, which is filled with Germans, and you fight through it. You find your way to a pile of health and supplies, and then using those supplies, you fight your way to the top of the building, where you find a sniper rifle. You are then told to use this sniper rifle to snipe the officers on the front line, which is actually pretty cool. After eliminating the 4 German officers, you are told that you're being reassigned. Oh no. You're being reassigned to someone called Major Zubov, and he'll be giving you orders from now on. And you're told that you need to reunite with him, rendezvous with him at the train station. So you fight your way to the train station, and that's the end of Mission 2. The next mission is pretty par for the course, but features some pretty interesting set pieces. You start out in this very marbly church-like building and fight your way to the top, where you fire on some Germans with their own mounted machine guns. You then navigate across this cool Russian factory place with like train cars and shit, eventually making your way back across a catwalk to do some counter-sniping. Then you have to find your way to Private Ogorodnikov, and that's where the next mission starts. There's not a ton to say about the 4th mission, but it is pretty cool, you have to give it that. You basically navigate your way through a sewer system, engaging in sniper duels, and ultimately infiltrating a German building from the inside. Like I said, not much to say. The location here is what makes the level so cool. It's definitely just a bit of a side mission to move the plot forward, and they said, why not make it in a cool location, like a sewer system, filled with German snipers, and I don't have a good answer to that. It's a cool mission. The 5th mission sees Voronin's unit under command of Sergeant Pavlov. At first, you provide sniper cover for your unit as you approach an apartment building. You then gain a new objective that has you clearing out said apartment building 1 floor at a time, 6 floors total. When not providing any plot progression, you can tell that this campaign particularly does its best to put you in an interesting combat scenario. Like the prior mission, where you were facing off against snipers in a sewer tunnel, this building adds an appreciated spice to the game's normal combat style. There are plenty of staircases and windows that make this a vertical and horizontal labyrinth, leaving you open from many angles, but giving you the opportunity to return the favor in a creative way. This is sometimes what I mean when I say set pieces, but that more so refers to the visual aspect of a level. What I'm referring to here is the level design, something that I don't think was particularly worth mentioning until now. I've talked a lot about story elements and some visual elements, but very little about the gameplay. This is something that I said would happen at the beginning of the video, to be fair. The fact is, Call of Duty's gameplay is the same throughout all 3 campaigns for the most part, and that's not a bad thing. People like to shoot things. So it's the details that you can add to the core gameplay loop that determine how good your game is. One of those details is level design. In the previous campaigns, if you were paying attention to the sets, most of them were hills or hallways. Here, it's not too different, but you can tell there's a concept at play, of vertical battle, and you have to appreciate that. After clearing the apartment building, you meet up with Sergeant Pavlov on the 4th floor, who tells you to go to the 2nd and 3rd floors to get anti-tank rifles. Your job is to eliminate the tanks while your comrades cover the infantry. After destroying the tanks, a timer appears, informing you that you have 4 minutes until reinforcements arrive, as you are left to defend the building while you wait for help. Once help arrives, the mission ends. The 6th mission is another one of those hills and hallways missions, as I'm going to start calling them. This mission doesn't really add much to the game other than to pad its runtime. There's one detail worth noting, which is that Veronin actually gets promoted to full sergeant before this mission begins. Perhaps the devs thought of it as the first mission as sergeant or something. Basically, all you do here is fight through a German-controlled train repair station. It's like a cool location, but everything else is pretty lacking. Nothing super interesting happens here. The 7th mission unfortunately doesn't differ too much from the 6th. In fact, it takes place directly afterwards, so it's basically the same mission. I've noticed that this game does this a lot, and I imagine it's less about poor design and more about technical limitations. Nowadays we have dynamic map generation, where only certain parts of the world around the player are loaded at once. Leaving an area unloads it, saving on system resources. I'm not sure if technology like this was around back when Call of Duty 1 came out, and if it wasn't, it makes sense why the devs are splitting up one battle into multiple missions. They probably can't fit 2 maps into one loading screen. Technological limitations like these are what breeds creativity. Something like procedural generation was most likely developed to save on system resources, and that one game mechanic has basically spawned an entire genre of roguelikes. Here the problem of fitting one big battle into multiple smaller levels could have been handled with a bit more grace. Here the level is played in one direction, meaning the timeline is completely continuous. You play level 6 straight through, which brings you to the halfway point of the battle, and then you play level 7 straight through, which brings you to the end of the battle. One perspective, one way to the end. It's a bit bland, isn't it? Here's how I would have worked around this limitation as the game designer. Step 1 would be to cut a lot of the content from Mission 6. For the most part, there is nothing going on here. There are a million things you could do to make this mission more interesting, so I won't bother picking one out of a hat. It's worth noting that I would design this mission to end on the tank demolition scene that Mission 7 ends on, as I think it serves as a pretty decent climax to the overall battle. Then, instead of drawing out the climax over 2 missions, you finish it all in Mission 6, only for the game to fade to black and for you to load in as a German soldier. My hopes would be that this could all be done in the same map to eliminate the need for a loading screen. You could really catch the player off guard here by forcing them to redo Mission 6, since that's all Mission 7 was anyways, except as a German. The dramatic irony would add to the tension as mission objectives appear telling you to position the tanks to defend against an incoming Soviet invasion. What an effective moment it would be for the player to have to play through this side of the story as a German soldier, already knowing the outcome as they just played through it as a Soviet. To top it all off, you could even have an AI soldier named Sergeant Veronin be scripted to blow up the tanks with the player inside, finally bringing relevance to the fact that Veronin is now a sergeant by forcing the player to experience his new expertise, both first-hand and second-hand. Also worth noting is that this is World War II, and the player has experienced almost no first-hand death sequences. The closest things I can think of are the hanging paratrooper from the American campaign, the death of Price from the British campaign, and the death of the soldier being dragged in Mission 1 of the Soviet campaign. Could be a really effective moment to have a scripted death scene where the player actually dies, as so far, depending on the difficulty you chose, you probably haven't gotten to experience that. And even if you did, death has no consequences in games like this. You just respawn and get to try again. So to have the player die, and then experience the consequences and watch as Veronin and his soldiers march past, would have had a profound impact on the rest of the player's experience with Veronin. But no, none of this happened, and instead we got a bloated mess that takes up 2 mission slots in what is the longest campaign in the game. Am I being a bit harsh on a game that came out in 2003? Perhaps. However, I don't think I'm wrong in saying that they totally could have pulled off a more interesting and compelling World War II narrative here. I do think if they pulled it off, that this would have been a game far ahead of its time, as 2003 was a time much before video games were considered artistic or creative. But that's the point of a critique, right? To say what could have been better. Missions 8 and 9 follow suit with the patterns established by 6 and 7, where it's one larger mission being broken into 2 smaller missions. At least this one's cool, however. This mission explains that there is a shortage of experienced engineers who can pilot the Soviet tanks, and so Sergeant Veronin steps in to do so. I like that this happens so soon after he's promoted, adding legitimacy to the decision to do so. I was worried when I saw him get the promotion that there would be no significance to it. Missions 6 and 7 really added to that fear, and is partly why when describing how I'd changed the level, I made it a key point to include an element that would add relevancy to that story beat. I suppose this is better late than never, though, isn't it? You don't really do anything on the tanks either, by the way. It's just sort of like a fuck yeah tanks kind of mission. Nothing necessarily wrong with that either. I mean, who doesn't love tanks? But it's definitely lacking a bit of depth. Alright, we made it. It's time to talk about the final mission of Call of Duty 1. Before we get too far into it though, I just want to point out the obvious challenges when writing the ending to a game like this. Earlier I was talking about how it's challenging to write a story into an event that already took place. The obvious decision is to go for realism and try to portray a very accurate representation of the reference content you are using for your game. This is sort of the decision that Call of Duty 1 seems to be taking. That being said, none of these officers seem to be real people, and none of them have particularly interesting stories. I would have to say that the game ultimately fails in this regard, and instead leans heavily on action and visual/conceptual storytelling. This is, after all, the story of the Allied success. It makes sense that this game is effectively a compilation of just that. And in that regard, the game succeeds greatly. So how do you write the ending to a story whose ending is already written? Well, how did the war end? Well, the final real battle was the Battle of Okinawa, where, if you're even a little bit observant, you may have noticed does not feature the Soviets. But more so than that, the war truly ended after the bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which, again, did not heavily feature the Soviets. So it's interesting that a large portion of the end of World War II and the success of the Allied victory over the Axis powers is being left out of the game that we previously described as a compilation of the Allied success. Instead, the final mission of the game focuses on the fall of Berlin, not the final battle of the war, but an important point on the timeline to be certain. This mission in particular takes place on April 30th, which, as of note, is the day that Hitler committed suicide. It's unfortunate then that this mission features virtually no examples of Allied success. The only cool moment is fighting to the top of the building to raise the flag, signifying the defeat of the German forces. But other than that, it's hills and hallways, my friends. So that's the last mission of Call of Duty. So I'll briefly summarize my thoughts on the first entry into this infamous franchise. Call of Duty 1 is pretty good. The 3 campaigns definitely scale in quality, which I guess is a good thing. The Soviet campaign obviously being the best of the 3. And I say obviously just because that's the one that has the most missions, so clearly that's where a lot of their attention was going. The gunplay seems to be very standard Call of Duty gunplay. Nice as a dog. The gunplay seems to be very standard Call of Duty gunplay. The guns are hit scan. There aren't any damage indicators. Enemies are quite weak. You are quite strong. It's good. Simple fun, you know? To bring it back to what we talked about at the beginning, what this game needed to nail was making the player feel like a badass Allied soldier in World War II. And I think for the most part, it did its job. You go on stealth missions, you snipe, you blow things up, you rush past enemy fire, you pilot a tank. There's a lot of fun action in this game, so the game ultimately does a pretty good job at making you feel like one cool guy. That being said, everything action-wise is pretty tame and surface level, not always fully realized. The action moments sort of range from, fuck yeah, I'm in a tank, to, fuck yeah, I'm shooting at a tank. There aren't too many elaborate action sequences that really convince you that you're a super badass or anything, which I guess is fine. In terms of overall story, this was not a focus of the game, so there really isn't one. If there is, it's usually taking a backseat to the action, like Sergeant Veronin's little promotion arc, or the story of you and Price sneaking onto a German boat. They're usually small, isolated stories. The bigger picture is the story of World War II, which is a bit unfair because it's such common knowledge that most people automatically fill in the blanks that they may have missed out on. So for that reason, I think you sort of need to judge it based off of what we talked about before. How close was it to actual events, and how good was the action, which we just talked about. The lens that I'm going to be viewing this through is what would the understanding of someone who has never learned anything about World War II be after playing this game. And I think when you think about it like that, you realize that this game kind of falls flat. Ultimately, the story portrayed is one of consistent success. Like I said, this feels like a compilation of some of the Allied successes in World War II. Unfortunately, there are no big defeats or losses to ground this game into a reality. To reference the Battle of the Bulge mission, what made that battle so spectacular were the absolutely giant odds that were stacked against the Allied forces. This game has no odds, it has no stakes, which to me makes it incredibly ineffective at being a military sim. Instead of emulating what life was like during the war, it feels like we are being taken on a scripted journey of a victory lap, and we are merely a spectator viewing through the eyes of a soldier. But we ourselves are no soldier. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in part 2.